Keanu Reeves arrived at the downtown convention center early in the evening. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the city streets. He wore a simple jacket, a plain shirt, and a pair of sunglasses, keeping his look casual. He didn't have a big entourage with him, just a small bag slung over his shoulder. He wanted to attend the charity event quietly, without drawing attention. As he often preferred, the line of people waiting to enter the event stretched down the sidewalk. Guests were chatting, checking their phones, and laughing with friends. Security guards were standing at the entrance, watching carefully, making sure everything went smoothly. They were new hires, and it was clear from the way they moved that they were trying to look serious and professional. They didn't recognize Keanu at first. To them, he looked like any other person trying to enter the event without permission. As Keanu approached the entrance, one of the guards stepped in front of him. His stance was stiff, and his tone carried authority. "Excuse me, sir. This line is only for VIP guests. You can't go in this way," he said firmly. Keanu paused and smiled politely. "I think I'm supposed to be at this event," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "I have an invitation." The guard frowned, unconvinced. "I don't see any VIP badge." "You'll have to wait your turn or come back later," he replied. Raising his hand to block him further, Keanu didn't argue or raise his voice. He just stood there quietly, a small smile still on his face. He looked around, noticing that some guests were staring, whispering to each other. A few people seemed confused, as though they recognized him but weren't sure. The guards, however, remained firm, believing he was just another person trying to sneak in. A young event staff member noticed the situation from a distance. She hurried over, hoping to explain to the guards who he really was. "He's supposed to be here," she said quickly. "Please let him through." The guards shook their heads. "No exceptions. Everyone has to follow the rules," one of them said. He didn't even glance at her as he continued to block Keanu. Keanu waited patiently. He didn't complain, didn't try to push past them, and didn't show frustration. His calm presence seemed to make people around him more uneasy. Whispers grew louder. Could it be?" someone murmured. A few people were starting to realize that he looked familiar, but they weren't sure enough to speak up. Meanwhile, inside the venue, organizers were beginning to notice that something was wrong. They were expecting him to arrive early for a brief preparation before the charity ceremony. When he didn't appear, the event coordinators started asking staff if they had seen him. A sense of mild panic spread. How could the guest of honor be delayed right at the entrance? Back outside, the young staff member tried again, showing her event pass. "He really is supposed to be here," she insisted. "You need to let him in." The guards exchanged looks but still refused. "Rules are rules," one said. "We don't make exceptions." Keanu watched the interaction quietly. He understood they were just doing their jobs. He didn't raise his voice, didn't get angry, and didn't try to argue. Instead, he waited calmly, as if he knew that the situation would sort itself out eventually. People walking by started to take notice. A small crowd formed around the entrance, curious about the unusual scene. Some were pointing discreetly. "That looks like... It can't be, right?" one whispered. "No way," another said, clearly unsure. The moment stretched on. The guards remained rigid, and Keanu continued to wait, composed and polite. His patience was almost magnetic. People watching couldn't help but notice how calm and respectful he was, especially given the misunderstanding. Some guests began to murmur to one another, realizing that the man who was being blocked looked a lot like the actor Keanu Reeves. The tension was quiet, but growing. Keanu's presence seemed to make the guards even more defensive, as though they were determined not to be embarrassed by letting someone in without following protocol. The staff member tried one more time, speaking firmly to them. "Please, he has to be here. He's the main guest for tonight." The guards finally hesitated. One of them looked closely at Keanu. Something seemed familiar, but he shook his head, unwilling to admit it. He didn't want to believe they had been blocking someone important. Keanu continued to wait calmly, observing the crowd and the surroundings. He didn't complain, didn't frown, didn't show any sign of irritation. He simply waited, confident that the misunderstanding would eventually be resolved. The scene drew the attention of more passers-by. All of them curious, some snapping discreet photos with their phones, others whispering excitedly as the evening sky grew darker. It was clear that this small standoff at the entrance was only going to get more attention. People were watching, and the misunderstanding was growing larger. Yet Keanu's calmness, patience, and respect for everyone involved stood out. Everyone who saw him in that moment couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. It was a quiet but powerful moment, showing the difference between authority and humility, impatience and patience. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't demand special treatment, and didn't try to embarrass anyone. He simply waited quietly for the truth to come out. And little did everyone there know, the truth was about to shock everyone in a way no one expected. The tension at the entrance continued to grow. Keanu Reeves remained calm, standing quietly as the security guards debated among themselves. They weren't sure what to do. On one hand, their instructions were clear: no one gets through without a proper VIP pass. On the other hand, there was something strange about the man in front of them. He looked too familiar, too composed, and there was a quiet authority in his presence that made them uneasy. Some guests nearby began to whisper, their curiosity growing with each passing second. "I think that's him," one person murmured. "It can't be, right?" asked another, their voice low with disbelief. Others had their phones out, discreetly taking pictures or recording the scene. The crowd wasn't huge, but the energy was building. People were captivated by the unusual standoff. They had never seen someone so calm and polite, while being blocked from entering a place they clearly belonged. Keanu didn't speak much. He just smiled occasionally, nodding politely to those around him who were watching. There was no anger in him, no frustration. His body language was relaxed, but his presence commanded attention. Even the guards, who had been trying to assert authority, felt a strange shift in the air. Something about the way he stood, quietly confident and patient, made them hesitate. The young staff member who had tried to help him earlier was still by his side. She looked worried and frustrated at the same time. She knew the organizers were expecting him inside, and yet here he was, blocked by guards who refused to listen. She tried again, her voice a little louder this time. "Please, you have to let him through. He's the guest of honor tonight." The lead guard's face tightened. He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable now that more people were paying attention. "I don't care who he is," he said firmly. "Rules are rules. He needs to show a VIP pass or wait his turn." Keanu remained silent. He didn't argue or push back. He simply waited, his calm patience creating a stark contrast to the tension around him. People in the crowd were starting to notice this, and their whispers grew louder. Some were beginning to step closer, hoping for a better view of the man who seemed so composed despite the misunderstanding. Inside the venue, things were becoming chaotic. Event organizers had been looking for him for several minutes and were growing increasingly anxious. They had been preparing for his arrival and had coordinated the schedule around him being there. When he hadn't shown up, they assumed there had been some miscommunication or delay. Now they were starting to panic. One of them pulled out their phone and began calling security, asking if anyone had seen him. Back outside, a few more guests had arrived and were heading to the entrance. Some recognized him immediately, while others did a double take. Murmurs spread through the small crowd like wildfire. "Isn't that?" one whispered. "Could it really be him?" someone else asked. The energy around the entrance began to change. The people watching were no longer just curious, they were excited, intrigued, and a little tense, waiting to see what would happen next. The guards started to feel the pressure. More people were paying attention, and their earlier confidence began to waver. One guard muttered to another, clearly unsure now. I think that's him," he said quietly. His partner frowned, shaking his head. "No, we can't just let him in." "We don't know for sure?" "We're following orders," he replied. Keanu continued to wait, patient and respectful. He occasionally glanced at the young staff member, offering a small nod as if to say, "It's okay. Don't worry." His demeanor was calm, almost serene, even though the situation could have been tense for anyone else. People around him were starting to notice how polite and composed he was. And it only made the contrast with the guard's rigid behavior more pronounced. The crowd was growing. Not because of him trying to cause attention, but because the moment itself had a magnetic quality. People loved to witness something unexpected, something human, and here it was, a quiet, patient man standing calmly while others argued over him. It was the kind of scene that made people stop, watch, and feel a connection to what was happening. Even if they didn't know the full story yet, the young staff member became more determined. She stepped closer to the guards and spoke firmly. "This is serious. He's supposed to be here. You need to check with your supervisor or someone in charge before blocking him. Please, just confirm before you make a mistake." The lead guard hesitated, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. He wanted to follow his orders, but he also felt a growing unease that maybe they had made a mistake. He glanced back toward the crowd, noticing the growing number of people watching, the subtle excitement building around the scene. The whispers and murmurs were now impossible to ignore. Some of the onlookers had started filming the situation, and the guard could feel the attention weighing on him. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't have to. His patience and calmness were speaking louder than words ever could. People around him were beginning to feel a sense of respect and admiration. It wasn't just that he was being blocked, it was the way he was handling it. He could have been frustrated, loud, or impatient. Instead, he was quietly standing there, composed, respectful, and understanding. Inside the venue, the organizers were becoming more desperate. One of them finally decided to go outside and check personally. They had been calling security, trying to locate him, and when they couldn't get clear answers, they knew they had to intervene. The coordinator hurried toward the entrance, weaving through the small crowd, their heart racing. They could already sense that something unusual was happening when the coordinator arrived at the entrance. They saw the scene immediately, Keanu standing calmly, the young staff member pleading with the guards, and a small crowd watching intently. The coordinator's eyes widened in surprise. There was no mistaking it, this was Keanu Reeves, the guest of honor. The man they had been expecting inside. The guards froze as the coordinator approached. Their confidence evaporated. They had no idea how to respond. The lead guard muttered something, but his words sounded weak, unsure. He had been blocking someone incredibly famous without realizing it. A wave of embarrassment washed over him. The coordinator stepped forward, their voice clear and firm. "He is supposed to be here. Let him through immediately." The crowd around the entrance reacted immediately. Some people cheered quietly while others just looked on in awe. The energy shifted again, from tense and uncertain to something full of excitement and relief. Keanu smiled politely and stepped forward, finally moving past the guards without any confrontation. As he walked past, he didn't look upset or irritated. Instead, he gave a small nod to the guards, a gesture of understanding and grace. It was almost as if he was forgiving them before they even had a chance to apologize. People nearby couldn't help but feel inspired by his behavior. The young staff member let out a small sigh of relief, smiling widely. "Finally," she whispered, almost to herself. The small crowd that had been watching began to disperse, some still snapping photos. Others talking excitedly about the unusual scene they had just witnessed. Keanu entered the venue quietly, still composed and humble, despite all the attention outside. Inside, the organizers were waiting anxiously, and the moment his presence was confirmed, a wave of relief and excitement swept through the room. He had finally arrived, and everything could continue as planned. Even though the misunderstanding outside could have been awkward, it didn't diminish the moment, it made it even more memorable. Everyone watching, including the guards, had witnessed something special. A man who handled a difficult situation with patience, respect, and quiet dignity. It was a small but powerful lesson in humility and grace as the event continued inside. The story of what had happened at the entrance started spreading quietly among the staff. They couldn't stop talking about how calm, kind, and composed Keanu had been, even while being blocked unfairly. The guards, still a little embarrassed, began to understand the impact of their actions and the way he handled it. The scene outside the entrance had already become the talk of the evening. People who had watched couldn't help but admire his patience and humility. It wasn't just that he was famous, it was that he was human, relatable, and respectful. Even in a situation where anyone else might have lost their temper. It was a quiet but powerful reminder, no matter who you are, patience, humility, and respect can turn a tense situation into something memorable and inspiring. Keanu had shown that in a way that words alone couldn't capture, leaving everyone, including the security guards, with a story they would remember for a long time. By the time Keanu Reeves was finally moving past the entrance, the energy outside was electric. The small crowd of onlookers had begun murmuring excitedly, some whispering to each other, some capturing videos with their phones. Everyone could feel that something remarkable was happening. Keanu's calm patience had turned a tense moment into a scene people wouldn't forget anytime soon. Inside the venue, the organizers were frantically trying to get the event back on schedule. They had been expecting him earlier, and now they were finally breathing a little easier as the young staff member waved them over, signaling that he had made it through. The coordinator who had rushed outside to check was almost out of breath, but smiling in relief. They quickly approached Keanu to guide him inside. As soon as he entered, the atmosphere in the main hall changed instantly. The room had been filled with guests chatting, waiting for the ceremony to begin. But now a sense of excitement swept through the crowd. People noticed him walking calmly through the doors. Even though Keanu had kept a low profile, there was no missing his presence. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a humility that made everyone feel instantly at ease. The organizers quickly explained to the guards what had happened. Their faces went pale as the realization hit them. They had spent all that time blocking someone who was supposed to be the guest of honor. The embarrassment was immediate, but it was mixed with awe. They couldn't believe they had been so strict, following rules without realizing who they were dealing with. The lead guard ran a hand over his face, trying to process it all. Meanwhile, Keanu didn't act upset. He didn't glare or scold anyone. Instead, he moved through the crowd with a gentle smile, acknowledging the staff who had tried to help him. He stopped briefly to nod at the young staff member, whose face was glowing with relief. That small gesture said more than words ever could. It was a quiet way of saying, "Thank you for standing up for me. I appreciate it." The audience began to recognize him as he walked toward the stage area. A few people gasped, others whispered excitedly, and a few even clapped softly. It was clear now that the man who had been blocked outside was, in fact, the person they had all been expecting. The organizers quickly ushered him to a seat near the front, making sure he was comfortable. Back at the entrance, the crowd that had gathered began talking among themselves. Many were still in awe of how calmly Keanu had handled the situation. "I can't believe he didn't get angry," one person said. "Most people would have started yelling by now." Another nodded. "It's amazing how patient and humble he is. That's why everyone loves him." Inside, the organizers began to prepare for the special part of the evening where Keanu would speak to the audience. They were excited and a little nervous because they wanted everything to go perfectly, especially after the chaotic start outside. The young staff member followed him closely, helping him with small details and guiding him to the stage area. Keanu took a moment to look around the hall. He observed the decorations, the lighting, and the people gathered for the event. Even though he was famous, he seemed genuinely interested in the work of the charity and the people who were there to support it. His presence was humble, not showy. He wasn't there to be admired, he was there to help and to make a difference. The organizers finally gathered everyone's attention. They wanted to start the ceremony, but they also wanted to acknowledge what had just happened outside. One of them cleared their throat and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we had a little confusion at the entrance tonight," they said. "But we are thrilled to announce that our special guest has finally arrived. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The room erupted in applause. The guards, now inside, watched in silence, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. They had been so sure of themselves, so certain that they were enforcing the rules, but now they realized the truth. They had learned a lesson in humility and in seeing beyond appearances. Keanu walked to the stage with his usual quiet grace. He waved to the audience, acknowledging their applause with a simple nod and a small, genuine smile. There was no grand entrance, no over-the-top gestures, just his calm, respectful presence that seemed to captivate everyone in the room. As he spoke to the audience, he shared a few words about the charity and why it mattered to him. His speech was heartfelt, simple, and relatable. He didn't use fancy language or try to impress anyone with his fame. Instead, he spoke from the heart, focusing on the people the charity aimed to help and the importance of supporting each other. The audience listened intently, clearly moved by his sincerity. Many people were taking notes or recording parts of his speech, not just because he was a celebrity, but because his words felt meaningful and authentic. Keanu's humility and genuine care for others were shining through every word. Back at the entrance, the guards were still processing everything. The lead guard shook his head slowly. "I can't believe we blocked him," he muttered under his breath. His partner looked down, feeling equally embarrassed. But then they noticed something remarkable. Keanu had not acted angry or upset. Instead, he had handled everything with patience and grace. The guards began to feel a deep respect for him, realizing that true greatness isn't about power or authority, it's about how you treat others. Even in difficult situations, the young staff member stayed nearby, helping Keanu with anything he needed. She couldn't stop smiling. She had witnessed firsthand how calm and patient he was, and she felt inspired. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that," she thought. "He's really something special." Keanu's presence had changed the mood inside the venue completely. The energy was no longer tense or chaotic, it was warm, positive, and uplifting. People felt encouraged, motivated, and inspired by his example. The event that had started with confusion and tension had now turned into a celebration of kindness, humility, and generosity. After his speech, Keanu stayed for a little while to interact with the guests and organizers. He shook hands, took pictures, and spoke to people with the same calm and respectful manner he had shown outside. Everyone who met him felt a sense of connection. He wasn't distant or untouchable, he was approachable, kind, and genuinely interested in others. The organizers were thrilled. They had worried about the chaotic start, but now they realized that everything had turned out perfectly. The incident outside had become a story in itself, one that would be remembered for years. It was a reminder of how patience, humility, and respect can turn a challenging situation into something inspiring. Even the guards eventually joined the event, quietly taking seats and observing. They had learned an unexpected lesson that evening. It isn't just rules and authority that matter, it's understanding, patience, and kindness. They watched Keanu move through the crowd with quiet dignity, and they couldn't help but feel inspired by his actions. By the end of the evening, everyone agreed that the event had been a huge success, not just because of the charity work being highlighted, but because of the human moments that had taken place. Keanu's calm, respectful behavior had touched everyone from the organizers to the staff, the guests, and even the guards who had blocked him initially. It was a night that no one who witnessed it would forget. The story of what happened outside the entrance became a tale shared for years, a story of patience, humility, and the power of handling difficult situations with grace. Keanu Reeves had shown, through his actions, that true greatness comes not from authority or fame, but from how you treat others, even when it's inconvenient or challenging. The small crowd outside had dispersed by the time the event concluded, but the memory of the standoff remained fresh. People talked about it quietly, admiring how someone so famous had remained so grounded, respectful, and patient. Even the guards, now back at their posts, felt changed by the experience. They realized that respect, humility, and calmness could have a far greater impact than any rule or instruction. Keanu had entered quietly, handled the misunderstanding with grace, and turned a tense moment into an unforgettable lesson for everyone around him. It was a perfect example of how one person's patience and respect can change the mood of a whole room, and even touch the hearts of those who initially treated him unfairly. The night ended on a high note. Keanu left quietly, just as he had arrived, without fanfare or attention. leaving behind a room full of inspired people and a story that would be told again and again. For everyone who had witnessed it, the lesson was clear: humility, kindness, and patience are far more powerful than anger, authority, or pride. Once Keanu Reeves had entered the venue and the initial confusion was cleared up, the energy in the room shifted completely. What had started as tension and embarrassment turned into excitement, anticipation, and inspiration. Everyone present could feel it. There was a sense that something meaningful was about to happen. Something beyond a regular event. Keanu was guided toward the center of the hall, where a small stage had been set up. The organizers had prepared this area to make him comfortable while also allowing him to address the audience. As he walked, he greeted a few staff members with a nod, a quiet smile, and a few words of thanks. He made no effort to dominate attention. He didn't need to. His presence alone had already captured the room, the audience, who had been chatting nervously and checking their watches during the delay, suddenly fell silent as they realized he was here to speak. There was a gentle hush, a mix of anticipation and respect. People leaned slightly forward in their seats, eager to hear him. The young staff member who had helped him at the entrance stayed nearby, quietly guiding him and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She felt a mix of pride and relief. Knowing that she had played a part in helping him reach the stage without further issues, Keanu began to speak softly, yet everyone could hear him clearly. He didn't start by talking about himself or his fame. Instead, he focused on the reason he was there, the charity, and the people it was meant to help. He spoke about the challenges that many families face, about children and adults who struggle every day, and the small acts of kindness that can create big changes. His words were simple, sincere, and heartfelt, but they carried a depth that made everyone in the room feel connected. As he spoke, the audience listened intently. Some people had tears in their eyes, touched by the sincerity and empathy in his voice. Others were nodding quietly, inspired by his perspective. It wasn't just a speech. It was a reminder that each of them could make a difference. That kindness and generosity mattered more than recognition or attention. The organizers looked on with relief and admiration. They had been worried that the rocky start at the entrance would cast a shadow over the evening, but Keanu's calm presence and genuine words had completely changed the mood. The tension from earlier had vanished, replaced with warmth, hope, and positivity. After a few moments, Keanu invited a few guests to share their stories. He wanted the audience to hear directly from the people whose lives had been impacted by the charity. Each story was powerful and moving, filled with courage, resilience, and gratitude. Keanu listened carefully, nodding and offering words of encouragement. He treated each person with the same attention and respect, making them feel valued and heard. The audience was captivated. People leaned forward, held their hands to their chests, or quietly wiped away tears. This was more than a formal event. It had become a deeply human experience. Keanu's humility and focus on others had transformed what could have been a simple charity evening into a moment of shared emotion and connection. Back at the entrance, the guards who had blocked him earlier were now inside, quietly observing from the side. Their faces were a mix of embarrassment, awe, and reflection. They had realized their mistake, but more importantly, they were witnessing the effect of his actions. They could see that his patience, calmness, and kindness had set the tone for the entire evening. The lesson was clear: respect and humility could accomplish far more than rigid authority. As the program continued, Keanu approached the final part of the event, the donation presentation. The charity organizers had planned this as the highlight, but with him present, it felt even more significant. Keanu handed over a symbolic donation to support the cause, but he did so quietly, without fanfare. He didn't want attention for himself. He wanted to focus on the people who would benefit from the support. The audience erupted in applause. But Keanu simply nodded humbly, acknowledging the appreciation without letting it distract him from the true purpose. He then encouraged others to contribute, reminding them that every little bit could make a difference. His words were simple, yet they carried a profound message. Generosity is not about recognition. It's about helping those in need. The young staff member smiled, noticing how effortlessly Keanu connected with everyone. He made people feel seen and valued, regardless of their status or position. Guests who had arrived thinking this would be a standard charity event were now leaving with a sense of inspiration, motivated to do more in their own lives. After the formal part of the evening ended, Keanu stayed for a few moments longer, mingling with guests. He listened to people's stories, offered encouragement, and shared quiet, thoughtful words with those who approached him. There were no grand gestures, no attempts to dominate the conversation, just genuine human interaction. Everyone who spoke with him felt it. He was fully present, fully engaged, and genuinely caring. The organizers were overwhelmed with gratitude. They had feared that the entrance incident would cast a shadow, but it had done the opposite. Keanu's presence and behavior had elevated the entire event. They realized that what had seemed like a challenge had become one of the most memorable parts of the evening. The guards, who had once blocked him, approached him quietly at the end. Their faces were nervous but sincere. We're sorry for earlier," one said softly. "We didn't know it was you." Keanu smiled warmly. "It's okay," he replied. "I understand. You were just doing your job." He shook their hands gently, leaving them both surprised and deeply moved. Their embarrassment faded, replaced by admiration. They had been reminded that humility and kindness are more powerful than authority or pride. The small crowd that remained around the exit was still talking quietly about what they had witnessed. People shared stories with each other, commenting on how calm, respectful, and humble Keanu had been throughout the evening. Some said they had never seen a celebrity act in such a genuinely human way. Others reflected on their own behavior and how they could apply some of the lessons they had just witnessed in their own lives. Keanu's quiet exit from the event was just as graceful as his entrance. He didn't seek attention or try to make a spectacle. He simply walked toward the door, nodding politely to those he passed, smiling softly, and offering quiet words of thanks to the organizers and staff who had helped him. His presence lingered in the room even after he had gone, leaving behind a sense of warmth, inspiration, and humanity. By the end of the night, the story of what had happened both outside and inside had already begun to spread among the staff and guests. The incident at the entrance, once a moment of tension, had transformed into a story of humility, patience, and grace. Everyone who had witnessed it understood that it wasn't just about a celebrity attending an event. It was about how a person's behavior could influence and inspire others in profound ways. The guards, once so rigid and unsure, had learned a lasting lesson. They realized that rules are important, but so is understanding the context and treating people with respect. They had been humbled, not in a harsh way, but by witnessing someone handle a difficult situation with quiet dignity. As the night drew to a close, the organizers reflected on the evening. What had started with confusion and frustration had turned into a celebration of kindness, generosity, and human connection. Keanu's actions had reminded everyone that patience, respect, and humility have the power to change the atmosphere, inspire others, and turn challenges into memorable, positive experiences. Guests left the venue feeling inspired, motivated to help others in their own lives, and grateful for having witnessed such a genuine display of humility and kindness. The young staff member who had guided Keanu throughout the evening felt a sense of pride and awe. She had seen firsthand how one person's patience and respect could affect so many people. Keanu's quiet influence had created a ripple effect. From the audience to the staff to the guards who had blocked him earlier, everyone left with something valuable, a reminder that true greatness is measured not by fame or authority, but by how you treat others, especially when it's difficult or inconvenient. The event had been a success in every sense. The charity had received support, the audience had been inspired, and those who had initially been part of a misunderstanding had learned something about humility and patience. The night would be remembered not just for the donations or speeches, but for the quiet, human moments that had made it extraordinary. And so, as the lights dimmed and the last guests left, the story of that evening became more than an event. It became a lesson in grace, kindness, and the power of remaining calm and respectful even in challenging situations. Keanu Reeves had quietly reminded everyone present that true influence comes from how you touch the lives of others, not how much attention you draw to yourself. As the charity event began to wind down, the atmosphere in the hall was filled with warmth, gratitude, and quiet excitement. Guests lingered, talking softly among themselves, inspired by what they had just witnessed. The speeches, the stories, and Keanu Reeves' calm, humble presence had left a lasting impression on everyone. People were still processing the events of the evening, particularly the unexpected drama at the entrance and the way it had been handled. Keanu, always quietly observant, moved slowly through the room, taking the time to acknowledge people individually. He shook hands, nodded, and offered kind words to those who approached him. Unlike many who might rush through these moments, he seemed fully present, paying attention to each person, listening sincerely, and responding with warmth. His actions made everyone feel important and valued. Even the youngest volunteers who had helped set up the event, the guards who had blocked him earlier, stood to the side, still feeling embarrassed but also deeply moved. They watched quietly as Keanu interacted with the guests. Every smile he shared, every polite nod, and every patient response was a reminder of the lesson they had learned. It was clear to them now that fame or authority was nothing compared to humility and respect. The embarrassment they had felt earlier was replaced with admiration. They had witnessed someone turn a difficult situation into a lesson in kindness. The young staff member who had assisted him throughout the evening followed closely, making sure he had everything he needed. She couldn't help but smile, reflecting on how the night had unfolded. "I've never seen someone handle a situation like that," she thought. He was calm when he could have been frustrated, patient when others were being unreasonable, and respectful to everyone, even to the guards who blocked him. "It's inspiring." Keanu paused near the exit, glancing around the room one last time. His eyes met those of the organizers, and he offered a quiet, sincere nod of gratitude. "Thank you for having me," he said softly. "It was an honor to be here." The organizers, overwhelmed with appreciation, returned his gesture with heartfelt thanks. They knew that his presence had transformed the event, making it more meaningful than they could have imagined. He then turned to the guards who had been lingering awkwardly nearby. "I appreciate all of you keeping the venue safe tonight," he said warmly. "I know you were just doing your job, and I respect that." The guards were speechless. They had expected confrontation, criticism, or frustration, but instead they received gratitude and respect. It was humbling. They shook his hand, muttering apologies. But Keanu simply smiled and said, "It's okay, really. Thank you for everything." The guests and staff who were still present couldn't help but watch this interaction. They had already been impressed by his humility, but seeing him treat the guards with kindness and understanding added another layer to their admiration. It was a simple but profound lesson. No matter the circumstances, respect and patience can leave a stronger impression than anger or authority ever could. As the last few guests began to leave, the young staff member stayed behind, helping to tidy up and reflect on the evening. She thought about how the small misunderstanding at the entrance had almost overshadowed the event. But in the end, it had become one of its most memorable moments. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about celebrity. It was about how a person responded to a challenge with grace and humility. Keanu walked toward the exit slowly, taking one last look around the hall. The lights reflected off the decorations, the smiles on the staff's faces, and the lingering excitement of the audience who had attended. He had made an impact not through grand gestures or flashy appearances, but through genuine care, patience, and respect for everyone around him. It was a quiet influence, yet it was deeply powerful. Outside, a few people had lingered, hoping to catch a glimpse of him before he left. They waved quietly as he passed, and he nodded in acknowledgement, smiling warmly. Even in his departure, there was no showmanship, just a sincere, understated presence that left a lasting impression. People who had watched him leave felt inspired, motivated to carry a bit of that humility and kindness into their own lives. The guards, now fully aware of who they had been blocking earlier, stood silently. They had experienced something unusual, someone with fame, influence, and recognition choosing to respond with patience instead of anger, with humility instead of pride. The lesson stayed with them. They realized that authority alone is not enough, and that true respect is earned by how you treat others. Especially in moments of challenge. Back inside, the organizers gathered for a brief moment to reflect on the evening. The chaos at the entrance had been stressful, but it had led to something extraordinary. Keanu's calm, respectful demeanor had set the tone for the entire night, transforming a potential disaster into a lesson in patience, humility, and genuine kindness. They knew this was a story they would share for years to come. Even the guests, many of whom had never met him in person before, left feeling inspired. They had witnessed someone famous handle a tense situation with grace, speak sincerely about meaningful causes, and treat everyone with respect regardless of their role. It wasn't just an event about charity anymore. It had become a story about human connection, empathy, and humility. The young staff member stayed behind until the last few lights were turned off. She thought about what she had learned that night, not just about the importance of the charity or the work being done, but about the impact of patience, calmness, and respect. Keanu's behavior had shown her that small acts of humility could leave lasting impressions, even in moments that seemed challenging or frustrating. As Keanu left the building quietly, the night outside was calm. The city lights twinkled, and the air carried a sense of peace and reflection. He walked to his car without fanfare, without photographers crowding him, without a single showy gesture. His actions had spoken louder than any publicity ever could. He had arrived quietly, handled a tense situation with dignity, supported the charity, and left quietly. Yet the impact of his presence would stay with everyone involved for a long time. The story of the evening, the misunderstanding at the entrance, the guard's reaction, the audience's awe, and Keanu's calm, humble response was something that would be remembered for years. It was a story of patience, respect, and human connection. It was a story that reminded everyone present that true greatness is not measured by fame, wealth, or authority, but by how you treat others, especially when it's difficult. Even after he had gone, the conversations continued. Guests, staff, and even the security team shared what they had witnessed with friends and colleagues. People spoke about his kindness, humility, and patience. The night had become more than just a charity event. It had become a lesson in how one person's behavior can inspire others, transform a situation, and leave a lasting, positive impression. The guards left last, quietly reflecting on what had happened. They understood now that rules and authority are important, but empathy, understanding, and patience can be even more powerful. They had been humbled, not in a harsh way, but in a way that inspired them to do better, to be more understanding in the future, and to remember that every person deserves respect. Back at the venue, the organizers finally finished their cleanup, smiling and feeling fulfilled. They had worried that the evening might be remembered for the initial confusion at the entrance, but it was clear that what everyone would remember was Keanu's calm, respectful, and human-centered approach. His presence had elevated the event, making it unforgettable in the best way possible. The young staff member took one last look around the empty hall. She thought about how quickly a tense situation had turned into an inspiring lesson for everyone. She felt grateful to have been part of it and knew that the story of that night would stay with her forever. Keanu's quiet exit from the city that night mirrored the way he had entered, simply, calmly, and with humility. Yet the impact of his presence lingered everywhere. It was a reminder to all who had witnessed it that patience, respect, and humility are qualities that can transform situations, inspire others, and leave lasting impressions far beyond what words or fame can achieve. The night ended quietly, but the lessons of the evening continued to ripple through everyone involved. Guests, staff, and even the guards carried the memory of Keanu Reeves' calm patience, his humble presence, and his respectful treatment of others. It was a story that reminded everyone that no matter how famous or influential someone may be, true greatness comes from kindness, understanding, and humility. And in the end, that was the lasting impression he left behind, a quiet, yet unforgettable reminder of how patience, respect, and humility can touch the hearts of everyone, even in moments of tension or misunderstanding. The story of the evening, from the moment he was blocked at the entrance to the final farewell, became a testament to the power of human decency and the impact one person can have by simply being kind, calm, and respectful.